Hi, my friends, welcome. I'm so grateful that you're here. I miss you guys a lot, truly. And before we get started, let's open up with a word of prayer together. Jesus, thank you for this time. Thank you for these amazing kiddos and the ways that you are loving them and sustaining them and being with them in the midst of hard times. Times that feel uncertain and scary sometimes. Thank you that you are strong and secure and safe for us to rest in. Thank you that we can trust you even when we don't understand or we don't see what's going on. Pray that you would be with us in this time. Help these kiddos to have hearts that are open and minds that are ready to receive your word. Pray that you would speak through me and that you would say whatever you want to say and that I wouldn't get in the way. And Jesus, I pray that these kids would know that they are so loved. They are so loved, not because of anything they do or anything that they haven't done, but because you are yourself love. You love them so much, and they are yours, and they are precious. I thank you for this time, and I pray that it would be fun. You're gonna pray, amen. So let's get started. So here's the plan for today. We had some issues with our curriculum. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna give you a super fast flyby overview of Israel entering the promised land and the judges, and then we're gonna jump straight into lesson 25. Sound like a plan? Awesome. Okay, so here's your quick overview of what would have been lesson 23. So we have talked about how up until this point, Moses and the people have been following God through the wilderness. The spies come back and they tell the people like, oh my gosh, these people are really big and they're really scary and we don't think that we can do this. But Joshua and Caleb tell them, no, we can trust that God is going to give us this land. We don't have to be afraid. But the people are like, nah, let's be afraid instead. So instead of going and entering the land that God promised to them and trusting that he would keep leading them, the people had to continue wandering in the wilderness at God's leading for 40 years. And so we had to wait for all of the generation who had seen God take them out of Egypt to die, including Moses. And then God would choose a new leader and lead the next generation of his people into the land that he promised them. So God chose Joshua to be the next leader. Remember, Joshua was one of the spies who was like, yeah, we need to trust God. And so God chooses Joshua, and the way that he chose to show the people that Joshua was the leader that he wanted to lead his people was by having him do some of the same sorts of things that he had done with Moses and the people before. So Joshua parts the Jordan River by God's power. And then instead of like armoring up and being ready to fight, God gives them some pretty weird instructions. God has them march around the city of Jericho, and they march for several days. And then eventually God has them blow their trumpets, and at the sound of all the noise making, the walls just come crumbling down and the people take the land. So we can see, this is actually a really fun story. So if you want to go look it up in your Bibles and read it with your family, I highly recommend it. It's awesome. It's crazy, and it shows us that God is faithful to his promises and that it's God who's doing the work and not the people. So that's pretty cool. God also promises to send Israel a new prophet. God chose Joshua to lead his people into the promised land. And the people have to trust and obey God in all things. So, that would be lesson 23. We're trusting and obeying God, we're following him, and we're watching God do the deliverance and the saving and the giving of his promises. The people aren't earning it, they're not fighting and grabbing it for themselves. It's God who's clearly giving it to them. So to sum up that, Israel trusts and obeys God, and as a result, Israel inherits the land. It's important to note that Israel, they did inherit the land, but they didn't take all of the land. God gave them very specific instructions about how to take the land and what that should look like and what land they were to take and all of that. The people did not completely follow God's instructions, and so the peoples that remained in the land that Israel was supposed to take continue to come up and be a problem for them throughout their history. And so that's something that we can watch and take note of. But that is a side note, so yeah. Okay, so in order to help us fill in the gaps that we're missing from those missing lessons, I'm going to read you a chapter from The Biggest Story. It's written by Kevin DeYoung and it's illustrated by Don Clark. And it's the story of how the snake crusher brings us back to the garden. I also like to think of it as a picture book overview of what we're learning in our class. So this is a really great book. I'm also going to post a video with the chapters that go before this in case you'd like a refresher of what we've learned so far in class. It's a really great story. So it also has really cool pictures and I love that. So yeah, I hope you love it as much as I do. Okay, so this is chapter 5. It was a very good thing God was always rescuing his people, because it seemed, no matter how many times God saved his people, the Israelites were never quite safe from themselves. See, after God delivered his people from Egypt, he gave them a lot of commandments. This wasn't to punish them, but to help and protect them. They were good commandments, and if they obeyed the commandments, God's people would be blessed. There would be food and children and long life and protection and a new home. It would be just like they were in paradise again. That's where God wanted to lead them all along, back to the garden. But if they didn't obey, there would be curses, just like the ones that fell on Adam and Eve and the serpent. As you might have guessed, the people didn't do so well obeying God's commands. And after Moses and his helper Joshua died, they disobeyed even more. They ignored the most important commands, and when they did work hard at some rules, like getting their sacrifices right, they didn't really obey those rules from the heart. They just checked them off the list and forgot about the most important commands. Not that God's people deserved it, but God finally gave them their promised land. God did the work to get them in, but God's people didn't do the work to drive everyone else out. This caused a lot of trouble for the Israelites. They constantly had enemies to fight, and worse, they constantly had to fight the temptation to be just like their enemies. Sometimes things would go well for Israel when they had a good leader and when they obeyed, but more often things went poorly. God gave the Israelites rules, but they didn't follow them. God made his dwelling among them, but they didn't act like they wanted him to stick around. God sent prophets, but Israel didn't listen. God provided priests, but the priests didn't know how to be holy. Later, God gave them kings, but the kings were a royal pain. Israel was a mess. Of course, God still had his promises to keep, but most days it was hard to imagine how anyone could save this stubborn people. It would have been even harder to imagine how the promised man could come from among these people. So that was that. Again, if you want to hear the first 4 chapters, you can go check out the other video saved in our class that's labeled with it. So yep. So the people are in the land and they go through this cycle of what we call the cycle of judges. So a judge is someone that God appointed to be the leader of his people. So God was their king. He's the one who was in charge, who made the decisions. God was running the show. But he appointed a judge to lead the people and be kind of the go-between between him and the people, so that the people would know what to do and how to follow God. So we go through this cycle. The first part of the cycle, is that Israel does what is evil in the sight of the Lord. Next, God judges them by giving them to their enemies. Next, the people cry out to God to save them. Next, God raises up a judge to deliver his people. And then the judge dies, and we repeat the cycle again. The judge dies, people are like, oh no, we don't have a leader. What are we gonna do? We're gonna do evil, even though God told us not to. And then we're gonna get judged again, and we're gonna be given to our enemies. And then we're gonna cry out to God to save us, and God will raise up a deliverer to save his people, and then the judge will die, and we'll do this over again. Seriously, this happens so many times. In fact, the entire book of Judges in the Bible, which is a pretty big book, is this cycle over and over and over and over again. The people need a leader who fears God in order to follow the leader's footsteps and also follow God the way that God asks them to. So yeah, there's that chapter. Okay, so now that we have reviewed and we've done our overview of the lessons that we're gonna miss, we're gonna get started with today's lesson, which is lesson 25. But before we get started, I wanted to show you, I'm wearing my t-shirt today that says root for each other because I want you to know that I'm rooting for you and that I think about you guys a lot and I pray for you. I know that it can be hard and it can be fun and it can be scary and it can be exciting. It can be a lot of things all at the same time. But we're in this together, even though we're not physically together. And yeah, we're gonna be okay. So let's get started with lesson 25 now. So let's imagine that you're at the grocery store with your mom and she wanted you to choose some bananas to purchase. Would you be looking for some beautiful yellow bananas, or would you be looking for something more like this? Would you be surprised if she told you to buy these bananas? I would be. Most people wouldn't want to buy brown bananas, thinking that they're going to be overripe and mushy and not very good for eating. However, if you're going to make banana bread, you want the brown ones, since they're exactly what you need to make good banana bread. In our previous lesson, we would have learned that Israel was also looking for something. They wanted a king. They wanted a king because all the nations around them, remember the nations that they were supposed to drive out and they didn't, had kings. And even though they already had a king, because they had God as their king, who's the ultimate best king, they wanted to look like everybody else. Israel was God's covenant people, and they were to be different from all the other nations. God is their one true king. But God gave them a king anyways, because they kept asking. So, I have a gift bag here. Actually, I received this from one of you guys, so, And I have something inside this gift bag that is kingly. Let's see if we can find it. Haha, I bet this is it. Do you see something kingly? Dink. Did we take the right picture? There's some other stuff in here. But this looks like a kingly picture, right? So not only did Israel want a king like the other nations, they also had an idea of what a king should look like maybe wearing a crown. So I want you to pull out your Bibles and you're gonna open up to 1 Samuel 9, 1 through 2. So 1 Samuel, it's the first of the two Samuels, and you're gonna go to chapter 9, the big 9, and you're gonna start at verse 1. So let's read it together. There was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel, son of Zeror, son of Bechorath, son of Ephrathah, a Benjamite, a man of wealth. And he had a son whose name was Saul, a handsome young man. There was not a man among the people of Israel more handsome than he. That startled me. I apologize. That was my phone. Moving along. From his shoulders upward, he was taller than any of the people. Does this appear to be the kind of man Israel would want for a king? Tall and handsome and rich. Would Saul look impressive to the other nations as he goes out to battle? Yeah. So we've got Mr. King Saul. He is the man that the people thought that they wanted for their king. So let's see how that goes. God did give Israel the king that they wanted so badly. Chapters 11 through 12 of 1 Samuel show that God was with King Saul, and he gave them victories over Israel's enemies. For a time, Israel thought that their troubles were finally over, as they had a mighty, handsome, and victorious king to lead them into battle. However, as time went on, something changed. Saul decided it was not enough to be Israel's king. He decided he could also be a priest and offer sacrifices. Is there anything wrong with this? Do you guys remember what tribe of Israel Saul came from? They came from the tribe of Benjamin. Which tribe did a priest come from? The tribe of Levi. Would this matter to God? Could Saul just choose to lead Israel his own way instead of God's way? Let's find out. I want you to turn to 1 Samuel chapter 13, and we're going to start at verse 13 and go to verse 14. And Samuel said to Saul, "You have done foolishly." Samuel was the prophet at the time of Saul, so he was the one who would deliver messages from God to the people. "You have not kept the command of the Lord your God with which he commanded you. For then the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be prince over his people because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you." Did Saul's disobedience matter to God? What did God say now was going to happen? The kingdom would be removed from Saul. So we've got King Saul. Nope. What kind of man would God replace him with? A taller, more handsome, more rich, maybe more strong? Recall what the people would choose. Do you want the yellow banana or the brown one? It depends on what you're looking for. The yellow one might appear to be better, just like King Saul looks like he would be the perfect king. But if you're making banana bread, you're going to want a brown banana king. Israel wanted a king for all the wrong reasons, and it also had the wrong things in mind about what would make a good king. Saul had seemed like the right kind of king, and for a time, God did appoint Saul to be king, but God had a different kind of king in mind for his people. I told you that there was something kingly in here. Let's see if we can find something else, because this doesn't look like it's it. There's lots of things in here. Let's dump them all out and see what we can find. Aha! I think I found something. Let's see. We're gonna use some tape. Pause. Ta-da! It's a heart! We found the pieces of a heart. Earlier, we said we were gonna pick something kingly out of the bag. We chose the crown. But we didn't know that hidden in the pieces was something much more kingly, even though it doesn't appear that way. It was just kind of pieces of bread paper. The king that God had in mind for his people was a man after his own heart. Let's read 1 Samuel 16:1. And it says, "The Lord said to Samuel, the prophet, 'How long will you grieve over Saul, since I have rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided for myself a king from among his sons.' So Samuel did what God said, and he went to see Jesse. Jesse had 7 sons that would pass before Samuel so that he could look at each one. When Samuel saw the first son, he thought surely he looked like a king. What do you think that he was looking for that might have given him this opinion? This is what God said to Samuel. 1 Samuel 16:7 says, "But the Lord said to Samuel, 'Do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord does not see as a man sees. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart.'" What mistake was Samuel making? What was he looking for? Someone who looked kingly on the outside. But what was important for the kind of king that God wanted for his people? God wanted a man after his own heart. Jesse did have one more son, the youngest one, and his name was David. This young man was a shepherd boy, and he was the very person that God had in mind to rule his people, a man after God's own heart. So in our bag of kingliness, God chose for his people a new king, and that would be King David. Because David was God's chosen king and a man after God's own heart, David became a great king over Israel, and Israel became a great and mighty nation. So we've got all of these things. David ruled over Israel for 40 years, and God blessed them and brought peace to Israel. So now, God's covenant people were living under the good rule of God's chosen king to lead in the land that God promised them. But God had an even greater promise for King David and the people of Israel. Um, 2 Samuel 7:9-13 and verse 16 says this. "And I have been with you wherever you went, and have cut off all your enemies from before you. And I will make for you a great name, like the name of the great ones on the earth. And I will appoint a place for the people Israel, and will plant them, so that they may dwell in their own place and be disturbed no more. And violent men shall afflict them no more, as formerly from the time that I appointed judges over my people Israel. And I will give you rest from your enemies. Moreover, the Lord declares to you that the Lord will make you a house. When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever." What does God promise to do for the people of Israel in the future? They will live in the land and not be bothered by enemies anymore. "And your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me. Your throne shall be established forever." So what is God promising David in these last verses? What will happen after David dies? How long will David's throne last? The great nation of Israel would have someone on David's throne forever. All along, God had planned a king for his people. However, the kind of king Israel thought that they needed was very different from the kind of king that God knew his people needed. God had in mind a king like David, a man after his heart. And after David died, God would raise up a new king, one of David's offspring, or one of David's children's children, who would rule Israel forever and give the people rest from every enemy. So that is the end of our lesson for today. I hope that you have enjoyed it. I will read for you the next chapter in our book, which goes over what we just talked about. This is chapter 6. God's people had a hard time not copying everyone else around them. This was especially true when it came to having a king. Although God warned them how bad kings could be, they just had to have one. So eventually God gave them a king. Be careful what you ask for because you just might get it. The first king was Saul. He was very impressive height-wise and pretty disappointing in every other way. The second monarch, young David from Bethlehem, was definitely much better. In fact, before we get to the king, there's almost no one more important than King David. When David wasn't busy sinning, which he did in some really big ways, he was a good, wise, merciful king. Many good things happened to God's people when David was in charge. They were victorious and prosperous and blessed. But the best thing that happened was what God promised would happen. God told David that he would have a son to sit on the throne. He promised David an everlasting kingdom, a kingdom that lasts forever. This was good news for David and even better news for God's people. It meant that God had not forgotten the guarantee he made in the garden. A deliverer was on his way, and now everyone who had ears to hear knew that he would be the son of David. So I'm going to cut off our reading at this point, but we will go over your worksheet, and I hope that you guys have a wonderful week, and that you take time to notice the little things in the world around you, whether that's little flowers sprouting up out of the garden, or maybe your parent made you a really yummy meal, or maybe you got to play with your siblings, something like that. I want you to take notice of the little moments that are special or bring joy, and I encourage you to actually write them down. As always, if you want to let me know how you're doing, if you have any questions or comments, or you want to tell me that my hair looks weird, or whatever it is, you are welcome to email me, or your parents can email me. I miss you guys so much, and I would love to hear from you. So that's all. And last but not least, let's go over your homework page together. So lesson 25, pull out your worksheets. Let's do that together. First things first is the clue. So the little clue page, it should say blank, everlasting blank. So it should be David's everlasting throne. That's what would have been on our clue card for today. And you could draw a picture on the other side if you would want to. If not, that's fine too. Live your best life, you know? Next page, it says David's throne everlasting. Feel free to color that in. You can color it, where'd it go? Oh, you can color it like mine. You cannot color it like mine. Have fun with it, you know? Whatever. And then the last part is the fill in the blank. So this part is a little bit tricky, so I want to encourage you to give it a try by yourself. You're going to open up to 2 Samuel 7, and you'll kind of find the answers in there. It's easiest if you use the ESV translation, but if it's tricky, I will walk us through the answers too. So if you want to try it on your own, go ahead and pause the video and go work on that, and then come back and you can check your answers, or you can just follow along with me. Either way is fine. So it says, and I will make for you a great blank, like the name of the great ones on the earth. And your house and your blank shall be made sure, blank, before me. Your blank shall be established forever. So let's go fill in those blanks. 2 Samuel 7, I've got it pulled up over here for me. So, excuse me. And I will make for you a great blank. Let's find it. Okay, so verse 9 says, and I will make for you a great name, like the name of the great ones on the earth. So blank number 1 is I will make for you a great name, like the name of the great ones on earth. Cool? Now let's find the next one. Okay. Our next answer is in verse 16. So it says, and your house and your kingdom, so blank number 2 is kingdom, shall be made sure, forever. Blank number 3 is forever before me. And then the next one is in that verse 2, or verse as well, not verse 2, as well. Here we go. Your throne shall be established forever. So our last blank is throne. So it should say, I will make for you a great name, like the name of the great ones on earth, and your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me. Your throne shall be established forever. So those are the answers. And yeah, have a great week.